Okay, I'm going to hand over to Greg now to also give us his presentation. Just to inform the participants again, at the end we will answer some of the questions that you had posed for Simon. And if we don't get to your question, we'll put it up in the forum and I'll request both Simon and Greg to answer all the questions. I've received quite a number of them and I've noted them down. So I'd like to hand over to Greg, please. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks, Doreen. Thanks, Simon. That was a great presentation. And thanks to the SuSanA team for putting this together today. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. As Doreen mentioned, my name is Greg Lestikow. I'm the Innovation and Performance Manager with the Global WASH team at IDE. So I'm based in Denver, Colorado in the States. But as I'll talk about, we have country programs in 7 countries in Southeast Asia and Africa. I'll be talking today about our sanitation marketing programs in rural areas of those countries where we're working, and specifically talking about a couple of different measurements of sustainability that we're thinking about when we think about bringing our SanMark programs to scale. Oh, sorry, hit the wrong button. Okay. So just a quick look at what I'll be talking about today. First, I'll give a really brief overview of IDE and kind of some of our philosophical underpinnings. I'll talk about our approach to sanitation marketing and try to tie that back to that IDE philosophy. And then I'll spend most of the day today talking about those 2 measurements of sustainability for SanMark at scale that I talked about before. So first, I won't go through this whole slide. There's a lot of text on there, but I think the real DNA and kind of the core of IDE is that we work with business and the markets to improve livelihoods and increase incomes for the rural poor. That's kind of our mission statement. You can see over on the left-hand side there the 4 pillars that we really stand on as an organization. We start with people, we design to context, and then really subscribe to the 2 ideas that business delivers, again going back to that working with business in the private sector, and then the idea that results rule. So I'll talk a lot about kind of how we think about results, not only for talking about what we do as an organization, but also for improving the way that we do business. That's IDE generally. When you look at what we do in markets for WASH, or sanitation marketing is the kind of common term for that, I think it aligns really well with our overall organizational philosophy. So we work through the private sector to build markets. We design products to context in each of those countries where we're working. We then work with local businesses and entrepreneurs to produce and distribute products. In this case, in sanitation marketing, we're talking about hygienic latrines. And then we also, in most cases, we recruit, train, and coach sales agents who are usually 100% commission-based, and they're paid by those suppliers, by those businesses that IDE is training and coaching as well. Hitting the wrong button. So just quickly, some of the results that we've garnered through sanitation marketing. As I mentioned, we work in 7 different countries in Asia and Africa. We sold over, or facilitated the sale of over 500,000 latrines in those 7 countries. And I also list our results from Cambodia here. Cambodia is our kind of flagship program, and I'll be talking most about Cambodia today, although I'll be talking about a couple of other programs. But in Cambodia, it's where we've reached the greatest scale to date. So we sold over 250,000 latrines there in Cambodia in the 7 provinces where we're working. So this just gives you a little bit more of a practical, concrete view of what it means to us to do sanitation marketing. So in this really simple diagram, as I mentioned, our approach is going to vary a little bit from country to country, but this is kind of the core of what we do. So we work with independent sales agents who we're training and coaching. Those sales agents are responsible for selling directly to rural households. So again, in this case, selling hygienic latrines to rural households through either individual household presentations or village level or community level presentations. The sales orders, the order information is then routed through, typically through what's called a management information system, or MIS. In most cases in IDE, that's a mobile-based platform that uses Salesforce, and then another program called Taro works to route that order and sales information to our independent latrine producers, who are again trained by IDE in things like basic business practices, and then also in production and installation of latrines. And then those latrine producers are responsible for manufacturing and installing the latrine to the rural households. That kind of brings us full circle back to our customer base, back to our rural customers. So given that model, and again, that's kind of a basic look at what the model is. Given that model, there are two ways that we think about sustainability. The first is latrine producer sustainability, and then the second is looking at it a bit more from a programmatic lens and programmatic sustainability, and looking at cost effectiveness over time. So those are the two types of sustainability that I'll get into here. So that first measure, latrine producer sustainability. So really at its base, we look at sanitation marketing as getting involved with and working with self-interested market actors, so those sales agents and latrine producers that I talked about earlier, who really need to be incentivized to participate in and build this market for sanitation products and services. So the real fundamental question that we wanted to be asking ourselves here is, are the producers, the latrine producers that we're working with, are they profitable? And the other way that I just ask that question to myself a lot of times is, do those producers have the incentive to continue participating in this market, and there's the profit motive? Is that present for them? So that's the first kind of central question that we want to be asking. The second is, if we have a good answer to that question, can we figure out what are some of the factors that lead to producer success so that we can build on those to kind of build on that sustainability? And so the cool thing is that IDE has invested really heavily in things like those management information systems that I talked about earlier, so that we have the kind of data that we need to answer these questions and to do this type of analysis. And as I said before, I'll talk about Cambodia here specifically, but this holds in a number of different countries where we work. So there's two kinds of data that we use to answer these questions. The first is when we did this analysis initially, we were collecting quarterly business data from those latrine producers, and there were over 300 of them, so we were getting quite a bit of data on things like revenue, costs, lag time between orders and installations, and that sort of thing. And then we're also, through that MIS system, we're getting that real-time sales data that we're able to analyze to kind of get us to some of these, what factors lead to producer success. So those are the two types of data that I'll be talking about here. And there are three takeaways. So this is an analysis that we did of our latrine producers and our sales agents, and three big takeaways that came out of it. The first is that by and large our latrine producers are profitable. So what this figure is showing you is in the seven provinces where we work in Cambodia, on average, what does a latrine producer look like as far as business operations? So what you can see if you look at the kind of top line of that chart where you see the gray numbers, that's the market price that these latrine producers are getting for their latrines. And then right below that in the light green, those are the margins that are coming into those latrine producers after all their costs are accounted for, things like transport, labor, and material. So what we see is that on average, the margins vary from province to province from about 10% up to over 30%. But again, on average, our latrine producers are profitable, which again is a good sign pointing in the right direction towards them being sustainable as businesses and sort of incentivized actors in this market. That's the real top line picture. The second takeaway that we had, though, was that latrine producers, the success that they're seeing is not by any means uniform or universal. So what this figure does is breaks those 300 and some odd latrine producers into 5 different groups based on the revenue that they're bringing in every month. And what you see is we have that top band there, the top performers, they're bringing in about $1,300 in profit a month off of $4,000 in revenue. So again, bringing in about 30% margins, which is great, and I think most people in business would be pretty happy with those margins. But what we see is that that drops off really significantly from that first group of top performers, so that by the time we get down to our bottom 40% or so of latrine producers, they're really bringing in very little revenue and more importantly, very little profit. And so the kind of top level takeaway here, you see these sorts of numbers in a lot of places, but 30% of our producers are responsible for 70% of sales, and that's really those top performers, and then a bit into that second quintile. So again, second takeaway is that success isn't uniform. Our third takeaway, I don't have a great picture to show for this takeaway, but just to walk you through it pretty briefly. So when we did this analysis, we had a set of relationships where sales agents had a kind of a one-on-one relationship with latrine producers. So when they made a sale, they would typically submit that order to a specific latrine producer. And this could cause what we found is that this could cause some really big problems because there was a misalignment between how sales agents acted and then how latrine producers acted. So on the sales agent side, there was a lot of turnover of sales agents. This had to do with a lot of things, the seasonality of sales, just the difficulty of being a commission-based sales agent. If anybody here has ever worked off of commission, they know that it can be really very challenging, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. And then on the latrine producer side, these are typically established businesses that we're working with. They have other products and services that they're putting out there, which means that they may or may not prioritize producing and installing latrines, which is a new product for them and potentially a risky product. So what we had is that sales agents would submit orders to their one latrine producer. That latrine producer may or may not get that produced and installed in a timely manner. And you can imagine the types of customer service issues and supply chain issues that presented. So those are our third takeaway was, just to sort of recap, we think overall latrine producers are profitable, but there's a lot of variation in that profitability. And then one of the big challenges that our latrine producers faced was this misalignment between sales agents, the orders coming in, and their ability or willingness to produce. Those are our big takeaways. Again, I think overall those takeaways kind of pointed to, we think that these businesses, especially these kind of top businesses, have some sustainability in them. But what's really important to us is what we're doing with that information. So this is an analysis that was done a bit ago, and what we've done in the meantime is taken that kind of first and second insight where we see that there are that 30% of producers making 70% of the money, and we've really started focusing on working with those successful entrepreneurs. So whereas we were working with over 300 latrine producers before, we've scaled that back to working with just over 100 now. So to us as an organization, that means that we're using our resources more efficiently, and ideally we're working with businesses who have the potential to remain in the market and continue building the market. And then secondly, when we look at that misalignment between sales agents and latrine producers, the IDE Cambodia team has put in place what's called a load balancing system that works with our Salesforce and TerraWorks infrastructure that's already in place to kind of break up some of those supply chain and customer service issues that we mentioned before. I'm going to show you a really quick picture of what this load balancing system looks like, with the caveat that I'm not a load balancing expert, so may be able to answer some of your questions, really basic questions. But if I'm not able to answer a question, I can always put you in touch with some of our load balancing experts here at IDE. So just really quickly, how load balancing works: the sales agent takes the order, sends that order onto a supply chain coordinator at IDE, again typically through their mobile phone, and then that supply chain coordinator is able to use the information and the data that we already have in those back-end systems to route those orders onto latrine producers. So the supply chain coordinator is taking into account things like how big of a backlog does a latrine producer have, how far away from the customer is that latrine producer, which obviously ties into transportation costs, the ability to deliver on time, etc. And then also if that latrine producer has had any issues in the past with installations and engineering, and whether it makes sense to continue routing orders onto that latrine producer without some kind of further work to make sure that they don't face those same issues in the future. So that's one of the ways, I think, really cool, innovative way that we're thinking about unblocking some of those misalignments between our two really key actors, and hopefully building up a more sustainable market system as a result. So our second sustainability measure that we look at is cost effectiveness. And as I mentioned before, you can also think about this. I think it's useful to put the word program cost effectiveness in there. And really, we're in the business of building markets for sanitation products and services. That's what we do at our core. And what we'd like to see is that as an organization and as a program over time, that our costs to be able to facilitate the sale and the installation of a latrine, we'd like to see those costs going down over time. That to us is an indication that that this program, as a program, has an element of sustainability to it. So the first question we ask is just how much does it cost to build those markets, to facilitate the sale of those latrines? Second, we like to look and see if those costs change over time. And then third, and this is kind of an ancillary question, but are we getting better as an organization over time? So as we move from country to country, or as our programs in country evolve, are we doing better and getting more cost effective? So again, the the nice thing is we have some really good data on hand to answer that question. The big metric that we're looking here, very simple, it's the program cost per latrine. So we're just looking at the monthly program expenses that go out, and then the resulting latrine sold each month. And then we take 6-month averages of both of those, just because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of variability in both of those over time. So the big metric that we end up with is our cost per latrine. I'm going to show you 2 pictures here. The first picture is from Cambodia. I've talked about this before, biggest program, as I mentioned. And what I'd point out here, first of all, if you look on the left-hand axis and then the red line, that is the cost per latrine, the program cost per latrine metric that I mentioned before. And then if you look on the right-hand axis and then the blue area, that's just the number of latrines cumulatively that we sold through the Cambodia program over time. And the trend that I point out here is that, as you can see over on the far left of the chart, when we're ramping up, just getting into our pilot, we're making obviously a lot of big investments in programs. So research and development, looking at product design, we're bringing in the right people to get us going on the pilot. So, and we're not selling a lot of latrines to begin with. So our per latrine cost is very high. But what we see is that really rapidly, we start ramping up sales. They're, nothing super impressive to begin with. But what you can see is that our per latrine cost goes down as those sales start to ramp up, so that we're bouncing around kind of the $50 to $60 per latrine mark. What happens in mid-2011 is we're taking the learnings that we got from that pilot phase and we're reinvesting in the program. So we're reinvesting again in things like personnel who are going to help take us to scale. We're investing in things like management information systems, and we're investing in making sure that we have the right product on the market. And what you can see is, again, our per latrine costs go up because we're making those investments. But even more quickly, we hit an inflection point where our sales start going up. At some point, they're actually they're going up. What's the word that I'm looking for? Anyway, they're rising very quickly. And what you can see is that as a result, very quickly, our cost per latrine goes down again, and even lower than what we see during the pilot phase. So we think that that learning is really helping us achieve better cost effectiveness. We're bouncing around kind of the $30 to $40 per latrine range. So, and had I given this presentation 3 months ago, the story would have ended there. What you can see is that in those last couple of months, our per latrine cost has started to go up a bit. We have some hypotheses about why that is. One of the reasons might be that we're getting to really pretty substantial coverage rates in the provinces where we're working, and that just may mean that it's more expensive to get toilets into the ground as you reach higher and higher saturation points. It's something we'll continue watching, and maybe in February of 2018 I'll do a similar presentation looking at what's happened to our cost effectiveness in Cambodia since then. So that's kind of the first story. We think this tells a good story about sustainability. And then the second story, that kind of secondary question I talked about, is being able to look from program to program. So in this case, looking at Cambodia here in the blue versus our Bangladesh program, which is a younger program, which is in the orange. And what you can see is a really similar trend. So you see that we start with relatively high costs in Bangladesh with that orange line. They drop as we start making sales. We make some of those same investments in things like personnel, product design, and systems, but we make them earlier in Bangladesh, so we're able to achieve scale much more quickly in Bangladesh. And there's a lot of other circumstances there. It's a different country context, obviously. It's a slightly different program approach, but we think that this overall tells the story that sustainability is, as we move from country to country and learn from what we've done in previous programs, we hope that we're getting better over time and getting a bit more cost effective. So I'm over my time. I apologize. Just a couple quick kind of next steps on cost effectiveness. We plan on continuing to monitor this in the various programs that we have in rural sanitation marketing that are coming to scale. We'd really like to start better understanding how the spending mix on innovation, so things like research and development and product design, how the mix of that versus just spending on operations, which is a lot of what we spend our money on in our programs that have come to scale, what that means for our cost effectiveness and our sustainability. And then also we're just really interested in learning more about what other folks are thinking about cost effectiveness. Specifically, I think Plan is doing some really cool work with Johnny Crocker at UNC. The Oxford Policy Management Group is doing some good work on value for money. So we're always just interested in other organizations who are kind of setting benchmarks for themselves and trying to think about benchmarks for the sector when we talk about cost effectiveness. That's it. Again, apologies for going over time, but again, really appreciate everybody's time and look forward to the conversation.
Okay.